Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to Sleepy Science Teller. I'm so happy that you've joined me tonight as we drift together into another soft and soothing exploration of the mind and the mysteries that hum quietly behind our thoughts. Tonight's discovery is a gentle and curious one. It's about the moments when silence isn't quite silent, when some people, sitting alone in the stillness, begin to hear faint whispers, soft music, or quiet voices that seem to come from nowhere at all. Why does that happen? Why do some people hear voices in the silence? Before we begin, take a moment to share in the comments below. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are right now? I love seeing how many corners of the world come together here, each one of us drifting off under the same quiet sky. And if you'd like to support these calm bedtime explorations, please remember to gently tap the like button and subscribe so you never miss another peaceful journey into the science of wonder. Sometimes, in the stillness of a quiet room, when the world seems to have gone completely silent, a faint whisper appears. It might sound like a distant word, a murmur of someone calling your name, or even a melody that feels half remembered. You look around, but there's no one there, only the hum of your own breathing, the soft rhythm of your heartbeat, and the slow drift of thought. This is where our journey begins tonight, in that curious, fragile space between sound and silence. It's a mystery that has puzzled scientists, philosophers, and dreamers for centuries. Why do some people hear voices in the quiet? For many, it feels like something spiritual, a message from beyond the physical world. In ancient times, people believed these voices came from gods, ancestors, or wandering spirits that spoke only to the chosen few. Priests, prophets, poets, they all claimed to hear whispers in moments of deep stillness. But science, as always, offers another layer to the mystery. It doesn't deny the wonder. It only tries to understand it, to trace it gently through the folds of the human mind. Inside your brain, right now, a universe of electrical storms is quietly unfolding. Tiny neurons are firing, sending invisible pulses of electricity from one to another, like stars passing light across a cosmic sea. Even when the world outside is silent, this inner universe never sleeps. The brain is a storyteller. It is always searching for meaning, always trying to make sense of what it perceives. When the eyes see, the brain builds images. When the ears hear, it builds sound. But when neither sight nor sound brings in new information, the brain doesn't simply stop. It begins to imagine. It begins to create. That creation sometimes takes the form of sound, a whisper that seems real, though it comes from within. You might wonder, how can the mind make something so vivid, so convincing, that it feels external, as if coming from the air itself? The answer lies in how we experience reality. Our senses don't truly show us the outside world directly. They translate energy, light, vibration, touch, into electrical patterns, and the brain paints the picture for us. That means everything we see, hear, or feel is already a creation inside the mind. And sometimes that creation takes on a life of its own. There's a fascinating story from history about a composer named Robert Schumann, a brilliant musician of the Romantic era. In his later years, he began to hear music constantly, complex symphonies, intricate harmonies, playing when the world around him was utterly still. He wrote them down, believing they were messages from angels. Today, neuroscientists might call these musical hallucinations. Sounds born in the brain, not in the air. But to Schumann, they were real as the notes he once played. That's the beauty and the mystery of hearing voices in silence. It blurs the line between imagination and perception, between the outer world and the inner one. Even now, scientists continue to study why it happens, and every discovery seems to deepen, not diminish, the wonder. So, as we float through this quiet exploration, remember that hearing something in silence doesn't always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it simply means your brain, like a dreamer who refuses to rest, has begun to sing softly to itself. Let's drift a little deeper now, into the gentle workings of perception. Imagine you are standing in an anechoic chamber, a room built to absorb every possible sound. No echoes, no background hum, no outside noise. Only your breath and your pulse and the faint ringing that seems to appear from nowhere. Scientists have studied what happens to people inside such rooms. At first, they find it peaceful, then unsettling. After a few minutes, many begin to hear faint sounds, voices, music, whispers, distant footsteps. But none of these are real. They are born from the brain itself. The reason is both simple and profound. The human brain is not built for silence. It expects sound constantly. Our ancestors lived in environments full of noise, rustling leaves, distant water, the murmur of human life. So when that stream of input stops completely, the brain compensates. It starts generating sound internally, filling the silence with imagined noise, just as the eyes create colors and patterns in darkness. You've likely noticed this too. When you lie awake at night, in a perfectly quiet room, and begin to hear a faint ringing or buzzing, that sound doesn't come from the outside world. It's the auditory system's way of keeping itself active, a gentle hum to say, I'm still listening. But sometimes, the sounds it makes are not just hums or tones. They're words, voices, echoes of memory, because the brain's language and auditory centers are deeply connected. When we think, we often think in words. So, when the auditory system is searching for something to hear, it may accidentally borrow from that inner monologue and project it as if it were external. Some people experience this only once in a while, perhaps when they're exhausted, lonely, or under stress. Others hear it more often, sometimes with clarity so strong it feels undeniable. Yet, this experience doesn't always need to be feared. For many, it's simply a reminder of how vast and creative the mind truly is. We are not machines, merely reacting to the world around us. We are active participants in building that world, moment by moment, even in silence. And perhaps that's what makes this mystery so gentle, so deeply human. Now, let's explore this mystery in a more personal way. Think of a time when you were alone, in the middle of the night, maybe reading or resting quietly. You thought you heard someone call your name, softly, like from another room. But when you listened closer, nothing, only silence. That small, uncertain moment. That's the essence of this phenomenon. The brain is constantly predicting what it expects to hear. When it senses something slightly ambiguous, a creak, a breath, a sigh of the wind, it tries to complete the pattern. And often, that completion comes in the form of a voice. This predictive nature of the brain is what allows us to understand speech, to anticipate words before they're fully spoken. It's a gift of evolution, but it can also play tricks on us, especially when the mind is tired or overstimulated. In one famous study, researchers played white noise to participants and asked if they could hear words within it. Almost half reported hearing faint phrases or voices, even though none existed. Their brains, eager to find meaning, created it from randomness. It's a beautiful paradox. The same creativity that helps us imagine art and music also allows us to hear whispers in the quiet. So, what are these voices, really? Are they memories resurfacing? Echoes of thought? The soul's way of listening inward? Science may give one kind of answer, but perhaps the experience itself is more poetic. Maybe hearing voices in silence is just the sound of consciousness, turning gently toward itself, like ripples in still water. Our thoughts touch the edges of awareness and return as sound. It's not madness. It's not even unusual. It's simply the human mind revealing how vast and mysterious and alive it truly is. So as you rest tonight, if you find the quiet isn't perfectly still, if you hear a faint whisper that seems to drift through the air, smile softly. It might just be your mind breathing, your consciousness, humming its quiet song beneath the stars. Silence isn't what we think it is. We imagine it as absence, the total stillness of the world, where nothing moves, nothing breathes, nothing stirs. But true silence doesn't exist. Even in the most peaceful room, there are sounds too soft to notice. The quiet hum of electricity in the walls, the whisper of your pulse beneath your skin, the slow movement of air through your lungs. And beyond those tiny vibrations, there's the inner world, a world of thoughts, memories, and emotions that never truly go silent. When we sit in stillness, we often expect emptiness, but instead we find something alive, a space that speaks back in ways we don't always understand. In the mid-20th century, a sound engineer named Harold Dennis entered what's called an anechoic chamber, a place designed to eliminate every possible echo. He expected peace, but within minutes, he began to hear faint whispers, strange tones, and the soft throb of his heartbeat echoing like thunder. He realized that when the world outside grows quiet, the body itself becomes an orchestra, the blood in the veins, the nervous system humming, the air moving through the sinuses. Each one creates sound. Silence, in its truest form, turns the body inside out. You stop hearing the world and start hearing yourself. And in that shift, something remarkable happens. The mind, always searching for pattern and meaning, begins to listen harder. It becomes sensitive, almost hyper-aware of every faint fluctuation. A creak, a sigh, a pulse. Each becomes magnified until silence transforms into a landscape of whispers. This is why, when people enter absolute quiet for long periods, they often feel unsettled. Some describe it as pressure, as if the air itself were heavy. Others say the silence roars, a deep, endless hum that seems to come from nowhere. That hum is the brain's way of reminding us that even in stillness, we are never without sound. You see, the brain doesn't just receive sound, it expects it. Our ears evolved to detect constant vibration, to keep us safe, to connect us to the rhythm of life around us. So, when that rhythm suddenly disappears, the mind compensates. It begins to amplify the quiet, turning microscopic noises into grand experiences. That's why when you lie in bed late at night and everything is still, you might start to hear faint ringing, a gentle buzz, or a whisper that seems to drift from nowhere. You're not imagining it. Your brain is simply doing what it always does, seeking sound, building meaning, staying alive in the silence. Silence is not empty, and it's not still. It's full of tiny worlds, each one quietly unfolding within you. Let's go a little deeper. Imagine you're standing in a vast forest. It's early morning. No voices, no footsteps, just a soft mist and the faint drip of dew. You close your eyes and listen. At first, you think it's silent, but the longer you stay, the more you begin to hear. A distant leaf falling, a bird shifting quietly on a branch, your own heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the earth. This is the truth of silence. It reveals itself slowly, like a shy animal stepping out of the trees. When we truly listen, we realize that what we call quiet is never empty. It's filled with the small, delicate sounds that we usually ignore. Our world has grown loud, machines humming, phones buzzing, voices filling every corner. So when the noise stops, our brains, conditioned by constant stimulation, find the absence strange, even frightening. In one experiment at the University of Minnesota, volunteers were asked to spend just 5 minutes in an anechoic chamber, a place so quiet you can hear the blood flow in your head. Most couldn't last longer than 3 minutes. They described the experience as too loud, not because of sound, but because of what they began to hear inside themselves. The silence became a mirror, reflecting their own thoughts, their own fears, their own inner voice. And that, perhaps, is why silence feels alive, because in the quiet, there's nothing left between you and your own mind. Some people report that during long periods of isolation, deep meditation, or time in remote wilderness, they begin to perceive whispers or tones that seem external. But what they're hearing is the deep, rhythmic hum of their own nervous system, the sound of being alive. When monks meditate in stone temples high in the mountains, they often speak of the sound of silence, a vibration that fills the air once the outer world fades. Science would say it's the brain amplifying internal noise. Spiritual traditions would say it's the soul recognizing itself. Maybe both are true. In either case, the lesson is simple. Quiet is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of something deeper, a field of subtle frequencies that only the still mind can hear. Now, let's move closer to home, to the quiet moments of everyday life. You might notice this in the early morning, when you wake before the world does. The air feels thick, the quiet almost tangible. If you listen closely, you can hear your own thoughts arriving, softly, like footsteps on snow. The refrigerator hums. The wind nudges the window. A car passes in the distance. And somewhere deep inside, your inner voice speaks, not in words, always, but in feelings, in impressions, in memories drifting across the edges of awareness. This is the everyday magic of why silence is never truly silent. Your brain is a vast instrument, tuned to interpret vibration. Even the smallest shift, a heartbeat, a breath, a flicker of air, is translated into experience. When those signals become faint, your brain turns inward, searching its own archives of sound. It may replay old voices, familiar laughter, the echo of a conversation long gone. These auditory memories surface naturally, like bubbles rising in still water. This is why many people say that when they're alone in the quiet, they sometimes hear the voices of loved ones who've passed away, not in a haunting way, but as gentle, comforting echoes. Science explains this as memory recall, activating the auditory cortex. But in a human sense, it feels like connection, like the silence itself remembers. And so, when we say, the quiet isn't always quiet, we're really saying that silence has layers. It's both outer stillness and inner resonance. It's both the world's pause and the mind's quiet song. In moments of deep peace, you can feel that hum, that steady vibration beneath everything. It's there when you breathe slowly, when your thoughts soften, and when you realize that even in the absence of sound, you're surrounded by life. True silence, if such a thing exists, isn't empty at all. It's the sound of the universe resting, the heartbeat of creation itself, barely audible, but always there. So the next time you find yourself in a quiet place, don't be afraid of what you might hear. Listen softly. There's music in the stillness. There are whispers beneath the calm. The quiet isn't empty. It's just waiting for you to notice. Sound is one of the most delicate miracles of perception. It begins as movement, invisible, rhythmic waves traveling through the air. But what you actually hear exists not in the world around you, but inside your mind, when a tree rustles, or a voice whispers your name. What reaches your ears is not the sound itself. It's vibration, pressure, tiny shifts in the air. Your ears capture these gentle ripples and send them inward through a labyrinth of microscopic hairs and membranes until they reach the brain, the true composer sound. Inside your head, something extraordinary happens. The brain takes those raw vibrations and transforms them into meaning. It doesn't simply record sound. It creates it. Think of it like this. Your ears are microphones, but your brain is the studio, mixing, shaping, and interpreting every tone you perceive. The part of your brain that does this work is called the auditory cortex, tucked inside a region known as the temporal lobe. It's a place of constant activity, where electrical patterns turn into the language of the world. When you hear a violin, your brain paints its soft vibration into emotion, warmth, sadness, tenderness. When you hear someone laugh, your brain fills it with familiarity and comfort. Sound is never just sound. It's meaning, memory, and feeling woven together by the mind. But here's the fascinating part. Even without external vibration, the auditory cortex doesn't fall silent. It keeps humming quietly, like an instrument waiting for the next note. And sometimes, when there's no sound coming in at all, it begins to play its own tune. This is why we can hear things that don't exist outside us, like music in a dream or the echo of a memory. The brain's sound-creating machinery isn't just reactive, it's creative. Scientists discovered this when studying people who lost their hearing later in life. Many reported that even in total silence, they could still hear familiar sounds. The ticking of a clock, the murmur of conversation, the rhythm of rain. Their brains, once trained to interpret these patterns, continue to generate them on their own. It's called auditory imagery, and it's the same process that allows you to hear a song in your head when the room is quiet. Close your eyes right now and think of your favorite song. Can you hear it playing faintly in your mind? That's not memory alone. That's the auditory cortex, creating sound without airwaves. In that sense, you carry your own private orchestra, one that plays, whether or not the world outside is silent. It's a humbling thought that what we call sound is not a property of the world itself, but a work of art painted by the mind. Let's explore that painting more closely. Every sound you hear is born in 3 stages: vibration, transmission, and perception. First, the outer world moves. A bird flaps its wings. A branch bends in the wind. Those movements disturb the air, creating ripples like circles spreading across water. Then your ear captures those ripples. The eardrum vibrates. Tiny bones called the hammer, anvil, and stirrup amplify the signal, and it travels into the cochlea, a spiral-shaped organ filled with fluid. Inside, thousands of hair-like cells sway with each vibration, converting them into electrical impulses that travel along the auditory nerve. And then the real magic begins. Those impulses reach the brain, where the auditory cortex translates them into experience. But here's what's truly mysterious. The brain doesn't merely decode sound. It builds it. It fills in gaps, smooths over imperfections, and uses memory to create continuity. That's why, when you hear someone speaking in a noisy room, your brain can still reconstruct their words, even if half the sound is missing. It's why you can listen to a broken recording and still hear the parts that aren't there. Your auditory cortex fills the silence with imagined information based on what it expects to hear. And this expectation, this predictive power, is where the mystery of hearing voices in silence truly begins. When the external world grows quiet, the brain still expects sound. It waits for vibration that never comes. So it begins to simulate, replaying old sounds, fragments of speech, or faint echoes of inner thought. It's not malfunction. It's imagination expressed through the language of sound. In fact, many researchers believe that the ability to imagine sound is what allowed humans to create language in the first place. Before we could speak aloud, we had to hear words in our minds. The auditory cortex became not just a receiver of sound, but a generator of it, a bridge between thought and voice. This creative spark still lives within us. When a poet hears rhythm in silence, or a composer imagines a melody before writing it down, they are using this ancient machinery, the same circuits that make silence speak. So the next time you find yourself in the quiet, and you think you hear something faint, a tune, a name, a whisper, know that it may simply be your brain, painting sound on the canvas of stillness. The quiet, in other words, is the mind's echo chamber, and the brain is the artist. Now let's drift a little deeper into the dreams of sound. Have you ever noticed that when you dream, you can hear people speak, you can hear music, thunder, or even your own voice calling out, yet your ears in that moment are hearing nothing from the outside world? That's because the same parts of the brain that process real sound also activate during dreams. The auditory cortex doesn't know whether a signal comes from outside or within. To it, both are real. This blurring between external and internal sound is part of what makes hearing voices in silence so fascinating and so mysterious. Imagine 2 overlapping worlds, one made of vibration and one made of imagination. The brain lives at their boundary, and sometimes the border between them softens When that happens, the sound we hear inside can feel as real as the sound we hear outside. The whisper in the mind and the whisper in the air become one. This, too, explains why people who lose hearing sometimes continue to experience sound. It's called phantom auditory perception, and it's similar to the phantom limb phenomenon, where people who lose a hand or leg still feel sensations from it. The brain, once accustomed to certain signals, keeps producing them because to the brain, the pattern of sound is part of what it means to exist. So what we hear isn't just a reflection of the world, it's a reflection of ourselves. When we listen, we're not just detecting vibration, we're interpreting it, coloring it with memory, emotion, and expectation. Every sound you've ever loved, the laughter of a friend, the ocean's breath, the hush of rain, lives inside you and can be replayed by your brain at any time. This is why silence often feels full, why even in total stillness, you can hear things. The auditory cortex hums like a dream engine, building soft echoes from the fabric of memory. Some neuroscientists even believe that this constant inner sound is part of consciousness itself, that the brain's rhythmic activity creates a sense of time passing, of moments flowing one into another. Perhaps, in some deep sense, sound is the mind's heartbeat. So as you rest tonight, remember this: every note, every whisper, every imagined sound is the brain's way of reminding you that you are alive. Silence is never truly silent. It is filled with the soft, endless creation of sound, not from the world, but from within you. The universe hums in your neurons. The stars vibrate in your thoughts. And the quiet you hear is simply your brain singing softly to itself. Close your eyes and imagine a quiet room. No wind, no voices, no sound at all. And yet, somewhere in the stillness, you hear something faint. A name, a melody, a whisper that seems to come from nowhere. You pause, listening carefully, but the world remains silent. Only your mind hums with quiet possibility. That moment, when you think you hear something that isn't there, is the smallest seed of what scientists call an auditory hallucination. It sounds unsettling, but in truth, this experience is far more common and far more human than most people realize. An auditory hallucination isn't a ghostly voice or madness whispering in the dark. It's simply the brain's natural rhythm, its habit of turning imagination into sound. You see, the mind never really stops listening. Even when the world is silent, your auditory cortex, the part of your brain that builds sound, keeps waiting, anticipating, predicting what might come next. It's as though your brain is an orchestra conductor standing before a silent stage, ready to cue the next note. And sometimes, when the musicians don't play, the conductor imagines a melody anyway. That imagined melody, that spontaneous creation of sound, is the essence of an auditory hallucination. But let's take a gentle step deeper and look at what's truly happening inside. Every moment, your brain receives billions of signals, some from the outside world and some from within. It's the brain's job to sort through them, to decide which ones are real and which ones are imagined. This process is called reality monitoring. Usually it works beautifully. You can tell when you're hearing someone speak and when you're just thinking in your own inner voice. But sometimes that line blurs, especially when the mind is tired or lonely, or drifting near sleep, the brain's internal voice, so familiar and constant, can start to sound a little more external, a little less me, and a little more someone else. And so a whisper forms, not from outside, but from the very circuits that help you think. It's not a sign of brokenness. It's a reflection of how deeply the mind listens, even to itself. In fact, research shows that when people hear voices, the same parts of the brain activate as when they hear real sound. The auditory cortex lights up just as if actual vibration were reaching the ears. The difference is not in where the sound is processed, but in how the brain labels it. The mind mistakes its own thought for something external, its own echo for someone else's speech. So, auditory hallucinations are not truly alien intrusions. They're moments when your imagination becomes so vivid that it feels real. And if that sounds familiar, it's because you experience something similar every night when you dream. Let's linger there for a moment. Inside the dreaming mind. In a dream, you hear conversations, music, footsteps, and distant laughter, but none of it comes from outside you. Your sleeping brain creates a world of sound so complete that you don't even question it. You simply believe. Dreaming, in a sense, is the most natural form of hallucination, one that happens to everyone, and it shows us that the brain doesn't need external input to create a fully immersive world of sound. This same creative system, awake or asleep, is what gives rise to auditory hallucinations. The difference is that in waking life, the brain tries harder to distinguish imagination from reality. It checks for context, for sensory confirmation. If you think you heard a voice, your brain looks around. Did anyone speak? Is there movement? Does it make sense here? Usually, when those checks fail, the brain dismisses the sound as imagination. But sometimes, the boundary weakens. This can happen under stress, sleep deprivation, grief, or deep emotional strain. It can happen during meditation, in fever, or in the edge state between wakefulness and dreaming, a twilight known as hypnagogia. In those moments, your sensory filters loosen, and your inner world can spill into the outer. You may hear your name being called just as you're falling asleep, or a fragment of music as you wake, or the echo of a voice you once knew returning softly in memory. Science sees this not as strangeness, but as evidence of the mind's seamless connection between imagination and perception. Auditory hallucinations, then, are not simply errors. They are expressions of the brain's creative power. They show how thought and sound are born from the same machinery. When an artist hears a melody before composing, or a writer hears dialogue before writing, those two are hallucinations, gentle ones, controlled by will and focus. It's only when the brain's boundaries fade, when it forgets that it is the source, that the sound feels external. That is the mystery, not why the mind hallucinates, but how it ever stops. Because in truth, your entire experience of sound is a hallucination that happens to agree with the physical world. Let's drift even deeper now. What does it feel like to hear a voice that isn't there? For some, it's frightening. For others, it's comforting. A familiar presence that offers company in loneliness. In ancient times, people believed such voices came from gods, spirits, or ancestors. The Greek philosophers wrote of inner guides, the daimon, that whispered wisdom in moments of silence. Socrates himself claimed that a quiet inner voice guided his choices and warned him of mistakes. Today, neuroscience offers a different frame, but the mystery feels the same, because no matter how we explain it, the experience of hearing something in silence touches the deepest part of human existence, our need to listen, to connect, to make meaning from the void. Modern research using brain scans has revealed that auditory hallucinations often involve two key regions, the auditory cortex and the Broca's area, a part of the brain linked to speech production. This suggests something fascinating. When a person hears a voice that isn't there, it may be their own inner speech, generated by Broca's area and then misinterpreted by the auditory cortex as an external sound. In other words, the brain speaks and then listens to itself without realizing it was a speaker all along. This loop between voice and hearing, between thought and sound, is delicate. When it stays balanced, we think internally, safely aware that our thoughts are our own. When it wavers, thought becomes voice, and imagination becomes sound. But even this, in its quiet beauty, is a reflection of how integrated your mind truly is, because to think, you must first hear your own thoughts. To understand language, you must simulate the sounds of words. And to imagine, you must temporarily blur the line between what's inside and what's outside. So perhaps the boundary between hearing and imagining was never meant to be solid. Perhaps it is through this soft crossing, through the gentle hallucination of inner sound, that we discover our creativity, our empathy, and our voice in the stillness of night, when the world is quiet and the hum of your mind continues. You may notice faint patterns, a rhythm, a whisper, a memory made audible. Don't be alarmed. That's the sound of your consciousness, speaking softly to itself. The mind is never truly silent. It is always creating, even when the world is still. Every whisper of thought, every remembered sound, every phantom word is proof that your brain is alive and endlessly expressive. You are, in the truest sense, the composer of your own universe, and the silence around you is not empty. It's listening. Let's begin with a single, quiet thought. Every sound you've ever heard, every voice that once spoke to you, every song, every whisper, every word, still lives somewhere inside your mind. Even now, beneath the layers of silence, your brain carries traces of those moments, tiny electric imprints, etched deep within the folds of memory. When you remember the voice of someone you love, you don't just recall the words they said. You hear them, don't you? That familiar tone, that rhythm, that softness, it all returns, as though they were standing beside you again. This is the magic of memory. It doesn't only preserve information, it preserves experience. To the brain, remembering a sound and hearing it anew aren't so different. In fact, brain scans show that when we imagine a sound, the same auditory regions light up as when we actually hear it. So when silence surrounds you, and you begin to hear faint echoes of voices, it might be your memory whispering to you, softly replaying fragments of sound from your past. Imagine sitting alone at night in a quiet room. You think you hear your name. You pause. The air is still, but deep inside your mind, the memory of your name being spoken hundreds, maybe thousands of times, exists as a pattern of connections. And sometimes those connections fire together, producing a tiny spark, a ghost of sound, a familiar resonance. Your brain, in that instant, is replaying a memory so vividly that it feels alive again. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful things about being human, our capacity to relive sound, to recreate it, to let the past speak again, inside the present moment. But memory alone doesn't explain it all. There's another player in this quiet theater of the mind: imagination. If memory is the library, imagination is the artist who wanders through it, borrowing old stories and creating new ones, where memory recalls what was. Imagination paints what could be, and sometimes the two merge so seamlessly that the mind can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. In that twilight of thought, between remembering and imagining, new voices are born. Not ghosts, not delusions, but the living music of the creative brain. Think of it this way. Every time you read a novel and hear the characters' voices in your mind, you are hallucinating in a gentle, conscious way. Your brain generates tone, texture, emotion, based purely on imagination and memory combined. So when silence seems to whisper, what you may truly be hearing is your own mind creating sound from the palette of all it has ever known. Let's explore this dance of memory and imagination more deeply. You might think of memory as something static, a box full of stored moments. But that isn't quite true. Memories are alive. Each time you recall one, your brain rebuilds it from fragments. And during that rebuilding, new details can blend in, sometimes drawn from imagination, sometimes from emotion, sometimes from pure creativity. It's as if every time you open the door to a memory, you also invite imagination to walk in beside it. The two sit together, quietly rewriting the past. This is why, when you think back to your childhood, you might hear your mother's laughter or your father's voice calling from another room. It feels real. It sounds real because in that moment, your brain is replaying the sensory traces and filling the missing parts with imagination. And there's a reason for that. The brain isn't built to record the world perfectly. It's built to make meaning, to connect experiences into patterns that help you understand and survive. So when there are gaps, and there always are, your imagination steps in to complete the picture. It doesn't want silence. It wants story. It wants continuity. That's why, in total quiet, when no sound exists to guide it, the mind begins to pull from memory, the rhythm of familiar speech, the murmur of loved ones, the hum of a world that used to be full. And as those old fragments reawaken, the imagination paints around them, filling in color and context. This process is not random. It's deeply emotional. The voices that rise from silence often belong to people who mattered most, to moments heavy with feeling. It's as though the mind, in its solitude, calls out softly to what it misses most, and the memory answers back. Neuroscientists studying auditory imagery found that when we recall a voice, it activates not only the auditory cortex, but also areas linked to emotion and empathy. The mind doesn't just play back sound, it replays connection. That's why memory and imagination so often produce voices rather than random noise, because voices are meaning. They carry emotion. comfort, story, identity. When the mind recreates them, it's not trying to deceive you. It's trying to soothe you, to remind you that even in silence, you are surrounded by echoes of every person and every sound that ever touched your life. Let's step even deeper and look at what happens when imagination takes the lead. Imagination, in many ways, is a kind of controlled hallucination. It's your brain's way of predicting the world, not just reacting to it. When you expect a sound, your brain prepares to hear it. Sometimes it prepares so vividly that you actually do. This predictive ability is crucial. It helps you understand speech in noisy rooms, anticipate rhythm in music, and even sense when someone is about to speak. But in silence, that predictive machinery doesn't stop. It keeps trying to fill the void. And sometimes its predictions become experiences. That's imagination at work. The mind's gentle habit of turning maybe into moment. Artists rely on this constantly. A composer hears a symphony before writing it. A poet listens to the rhythm of words before they exist on paper. And even in everyday life, you imagine voices, tones, and sounds. Whenever you think of someone you love, the difference between imagination and auditory hallucination is only intensity. Both are built from the same circuitry. Both are sound without vibration. One you control, the other surprises you. Still, both reveal the same truth, that silence is never truly silent. The human mind, with its vast network of memories and dreams, is always alive, always creating, always listening to itself. And perhaps that's what makes us so endlessly human. Our memories give us a world to revisit. Our imagination gives us a world to invent. And together, they blur the boundaries between what's real and what's remembered. So when the night is still and you sense a whisper that no one else hears, pause for a moment. It might not be a voice from beyond, but a gentle echo of your own mind, a memory unfolding, a dream replaying, a quiet reminder that everything you've ever heard still lives inside you. The silence, after all, is not an absence of sound. It's a canvas waiting for your mind to paint it full again. There is a saying that silence can be louder than sound. And perhaps that's true, because silence, like a mirror, often reflects what lies deepest within us. When you are peaceful, the quiet feels like rest. But when you are anxious, it can feel uneasy, almost alive. Have you ever noticed that when your heart is heavy, silence doesn't seem empty? It hums softly, as though your feelings have found a way to speak. Science has a gentle explanation for this. Our emotions don't just live in our thoughts. They shape the activity of our entire brain. When we feel joy, certain networks light up in rhythm and harmony. When we feel fear, others pulse sharply, alert and restless. These emotional signals can affect how we hear the world, even when there's no sound at all. Imagine for a moment that your mind is like a still pond. When calm, the water is glass, quiet, reflective, open. But when emotion stirs, loneliness, sadness, tension, ripples move through it. Those ripples can create sound where there is none, because the brain doesn't just interpret sound, it predicts it. It tries to match the outside world to the rhythm of what it feels inside. So when inside grows stormy, the brain begins to expect noise, And sometimes it creates it. That faint voice in stillness, that half-heard word in the night, may not come from anywhere outside you. It may be the echo of your own emotion, translating itself into a sound you can recognize. Our feelings, after all, speak in every language. Tears, heartbeat, breath, and sometimes sound. Let's take this more deeply now. You may have noticed that when you're anxious, the world seems louder. Every creak of the floorboard, every distant hum, feels sharper, more pronounced. That's because your brain, guided by emotion, is adjusting its sensitivity. Anxiety turns up the volume of awareness. Sadness makes the quiet seem heavier. Joy softens the edges of sound. And loneliness, perhaps the most human of emotions, can create its own company. In long periods of solitude, people often report hearing faint voices, not threatening or strange, but familiar, as though someone somewhere is gently speaking their name. It happens because the brain is wired for connection. We are social creatures. Our minds are built to listen for others. When that connection fades, the brain doesn't stop listening. It starts imagining. Neuroscientists have found that the same neural pathways used to process external voices also activate during deep loneliness or grief. The mind, craving social contact, fills the silence with phantom sound, just to remind itself of the presence it longs for. It's not madness, it's empathy turned inward. In a way, the brain is comforting itself, like a child whispering softly, so it won't feel alone in the dark. This gentle self-soothing is built into us. It's how we survive emptiness. When the world grows too quiet, we let our hearts make a little noise. Even musicians, when composing in solitude, have spoken of hearing faint melodies that seem to come from nowhere. But they know these are not ghosts. They are emotions translating themselves into sound. When you're inspired, your joy becomes rhythm. When you're lonely, your longing becomes voice. When you're grieving, your memories begin to sing. It's the same deep mechanism. Emotion turning into echo. Now, let's wander gently into the stillest parts of this idea. Think of emotion as vibration, not just a feeling, but an energy that moves through you. It stirs your breathing. It changes your heartbeat, and it shapes the brain's inner waves. When you feel, your whole body hums in tune. Sometimes that hum is faint, sometimes strong, but the brain, sensitive as a microphone, can mistake those vibrations for sound. That's why some people say that silence buzzes. It's not the world, it's your body, singing softly beneath your awareness. There's even a name for one form of this, the auditory somatic illusion, when the body's internal rhythm is misread as external noise. For example, after a stressful day, you might sit in silence and hear a faint rhythmic pulsing. That's not your imagination. It's your blood moving, your heart echoing through quiet nerves. But because emotion amplifies awareness, the mind can build those faint sensations into full experiences, a hum, a whisper, a memory that feels alive. In moments of deep emotion, love, loss, hope, or fear, the border between thought and sound softens. The brain doesn't just process feelings, it translates them. And sometimes that translation sounds like a voice, a mother hearing her late child's laughter in the night, a poet sensing a word before it's written. a lonely traveler hearing their name in the wind. These are not hallucinations in the clinical sense. They are emotional echoes, the mind's tender attempt to give sound a feeling, because to be human is to feel deeply and to listen even when no one is speaking. Perhaps that's why the silence of night feels sacred. It's not the absence of sound, but the space where your emotions can whisper freely. In that stillness, your heart hums softly, your memories murmur gently, and your mind listens to itself. The world may seem quiet, but inside you there is music, the rhythm of emotion, woven through the quiet fabric of your being. Close your eyes for a moment and think of your own voice, not the sound of it when you speak aloud, but the quiet voice that lives behind your thoughts, the one that says your name, or repeats a memory, or whispers softly when you read to yourself. That's inner speech, the silent dialogue that runs through your mind like a stream of consciousness. We all experience it, but few ever stop to wonder what it truly is. Is it sound? Is it language without air? Or is it something deeper, a thought so vivid that the brain translates it into sensation? Neuroscience has gently uncovered the answer. When you hear yourself thinking, your brain is using many of the same regions it uses for actual hearing. The auditory cortex lights up just as it would if you were listening to an external sound. At the same time, your speech production areas, like Broca's area, activate as if you were physically speaking. So, inner speech is a kind of halfway state. You are both the speaker and the listener of your own mind. It's not imagined. It's real in the sense that the brain is genuinely producing the experience of sound, only it's happening internally. This is why, when a line between these two systems blurs, the one that generates speech and the one that listens, the mind can sometimes mistake its own voice for another's. That's how, in moments of stress or exhaustion, the whisper of thought can slip into the quiet world around you and feel like it came from outside. Let's move more softly and explore the mystery a little deeper. Inner speech is more than mental chatter. It's the architecture of self-awareness. It's how we think in words. From childhood, we learn to guide ourselves with language, to think, plan, and imagine through the gentle rhythm of inner narration. As we grow, that inner voice becomes a companion of consciousness. It comforts, questions, remembers, and reasons with us. But because it sounds like speech, our brain processes it almost as if it's real sound. This creates a fascinating overlap, a shared space between thought and hearing. In people with exceptional sensitivity, or in those under deep emotional strain, the boundary between inner and outer can soften. When that happens, the voice that was once safely inside the mind can seem to step into the room. It's not always frightening. Sometimes it's comforting, like a loved one's voice reminding you of something kind. Sometimes it's neutral, like hearing your name called when you're lost in thought. And sometimes it can feel confusing, as though the brain itself is speaking too loudly. But even in those moments, it's not madness. It's a glimpse into how closely thought and sound intertwine. The human brain, so intricate and alive, doesn't fully separate thinking from listening. It translates both through the same gentle pathways of perception. So when you hear your own thoughts, you are, in a way, listening to your own brain working, hearing the machinery of consciousness itself. In MRI scans, scientists can actually see the overlap between the speech production system and the auditory perception system. When the connection between them weakens, say due to stress, isolation, or disrupted sleep, the brain may lose track of who generated the voice. Was it me, or was it someone else? That subtle confusion is what can turn thought into perceived sound, but far from being strange. This process reveals something tender about us. It shows that our minds are not isolated. They are built for dialogue. We are born to listen, even to ourselves. That quiet narrator within you is a sign of awareness, a rhythm of thought, woven through the still fabric of silence. So the next time you hear your inner voice, whether it's reading these words or softly guiding your thoughts, know that it is one of the most beautiful features of the human mind, the sound of consciousness, singing gently within the silence. There is a certain kind of silence that isn't empty. It hums softly with the weight of thoughts, with memories, with the subtle music of the mind. For those who sometimes hear voices in that silence, the quiet can feel alive, as if it's breathing back, responding to your emotions. But silence at its deepest level is not an enemy. It's a canvas, a space where the brain projects the delicate patterns of inner life. When we listen to the quiet, we are not only hearing the absence of sound, we are hearing the whispers of our own mind. And just like any sound in nature, a breeze, a wave, a heartbeat, it can be understood, soothed, and calmed. Science shows that even moments of silent hearing, those fleeting voices, those subtle internal echoes, are not signs of danger, but signs of a brain alive with imagination. The key is to understand them, to gently observe them, and to realize you are not at their mercy. You are the listener, and the silence is your orchestra. Within you, the mind is simply trying to communicate, to release emotion, to make sense of what it holds. When you understand that, the voices lose their sharpness. They become softer, more like ripples in a pond than storms in the sea. To find calm in the quiet, you don't have to fight the mind. You have to breathe with it. Find a moment, perhaps tonight, to sit in stillness. Let the room grow hushed. Let the faint hum of life drift into the background. Now listen. If a thought comes, let it come gently. If a whisper appears, your own name, a memory, a phrase, simply recognize it. It's your brain's language of emotion, spoken softly through sound. In that instant, the boundaries between imagination and hearing dissolve, and the mind's voice blends with the quiet around you. But you are still safe. You are still in control, because awareness, that gentle noticing, is your anchor. In mindfulness therapy, people who hear voices are taught to greet them like old friends, not to argue, not to obey, but simply to acknowledge their presence. They breathe, they observe, and over time, the voices fade into neutrality, like distant echoes. Silence becomes soft again, and what once felt intrusive becomes familiar, just another texture. In the vast soundscape of consciousness, the mind once heard no longer needs to shout. Imagine yourself now in a quiet place, the world asleep, the air still, the lights low. You take a slow, gentle breath and notice the faint rhythm of your own thoughts. There's peace here, a peace that isn't the absence of sound, but the acceptance of it. Even if you hear something in the stillness, a word, a memory, a murmur, you can let it float past. Like a cloud across a twilight sky, you can let the silence become your companion, because silence isn't truly empty. It holds the subtle vibrations of the universe and the soft pulse of your inner world. And the more you listen, without fear, without judgment, the more the quiet begins to heal. Scientists have found that calm awareness, even brief moments of mindful listening, can reshape neural pathways. The brain learns to separate real sounds from imagined ones, and balance returns. So when you rest tonight, remember this: the voices in silence are part of what makes you beautifully human. They are the mind's way of echoing its own existence. And when you meet that silence with calm curiosity, it transforms from confusion to clarity, from fear to fascination, from noise to music, the music of your own awareness, playing softly beneath the stars. And now, dear listener, we reach the end of our quiet journey. We have wandered through the science of the mind, through sound and silence, through the mystery of voices that live within. If you hear them sometimes, know this: you are not broken. You are exquisitely human, tuned to the deepest frequencies of thought. May your nights be calm, your silence soft, and your mind at peace, until we meet again in another quiet discovery, another gentle story of science and wonder. Good night and goodbye.